Have you ever poured your soul into something, worked late nights when no one was watching, sketched out ideas on napkins at coffee shops, fought through doubt and fatigue, only to have someone else stand in the spotlight, smile at your work, and claim it as their own? If you've been there, then you know the bitterness of betrayal. And if you haven't, let me take you into the heart of my story, because once you step inside, you'll understand just how devastating it feels, and how strangely satisfying it can be when the truth finally claws its way back into the light. My name is Daniel Rhodes. For the last 12 years, I've lived and breathed the tech industry. I wasn't some hoodie-wearing prodigy, nor was I born into venture capital circles or Ivy League connections. I was just me. A kid who grew up fixing old computers, who loved the puzzle of breaking down complicated systems, and who never stopped sketching new ideas in the margins of his notebooks. I worked my way up. Internships nobody wanted, jobs that barely paid, long commutes, and endless self-learning. My dream wasn't money, not really. It was recognition, the feeling that something I built mattered. 3 years ago, I landed what felt like my break, a mid-level product manager position at Crestmark Solutions, a growing software firm in San Francisco. Crestmark wasn't Google or Apple, but it was buzzing with energy. Every week, new investors toured our offices, sleek slide decks circulated in conference rooms, and management whispered about billion-dollar valuations. It was the kind of place where ambition hung heavy in the air, where people worked not just for salaries, but for the chance to be part of something bigger. That's where I met him. Ethan Cole, my boss. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, charismatic, a natural speaker who commanded rooms with ease. Ethan had the kind of confidence that made people lean in when he talked. The investors loved him. The executives trusted him. He wore the tailored suits, dropped the clever one-liners, and seemed to glide across the office like the floor was built just for him. And for a while, I admired him. I thought, maybe I can learn from him. Maybe this is how success looks in the real world. But charisma can be a dangerous mask. Behind the smile, Ethan was hollow. He didn't build, he borrowed. He didn't create, he collected. And for a while, he had a perfect system. People like me would grind away in the background, crafting solutions, writing lines of code, sketching features, only for Ethan to polish our work with his golden tongue and present it as his own. At first, I told myself this was the way of things. In corporate life, your boss takes credit sometimes, right? Maybe that's the trade-off. You contribute, they present, the company grows. But deep down, resentment simmered. Because when I lay awake at night, I knew the truth. The people making the difference weren't the ones at the podium. They were the ones hunched over keyboards, staring at glowing screens at 2 a.m., pushing ideas from nothing into something. The breaking point came with my idea. It started almost as a joke. Crestmark had been struggling with user retention. Customers signed up for our software, used it for a few weeks, and then drifted away. The executive team held endless meetings about it, but nothing stuck. One night, I was riding home on the BART train, exhausted, staring at the glowing rectangles of everyone's phones around me, when it clicked. People didn't just want software. They wanted engagement. They wanted a system that felt alive, adaptive, personal. I sketched out a concept for an AI-driven engagement engine, something that would study user behavior and respond with dynamic content, nudges, and rewards. Not just push notifications, personalized journeys. By the time the train pulled into my station, I had scribbled 6 messy pages of notes in my pocket notebook. Over the next month, I obsessed. I ran models, drew prototypes, even coded a bare-bones version on my own time. The results blew me away. User engagement tripled in my test environments. Churn rates dropped by half. It wasn't perfect, but it was promising. For the first time, I felt like I was holding lightning in my hands. I made the mistake of telling Ethan. We were in a weekly check-in, just the two of us. I walked him through the prototype, showed him the data, laid out the roadmap. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that half-smile tugging at his lips. Interesting, he said, like he was tasting a wine he didn't quite understand. Leave it with me. Let's see how it fits into the broader picture. I left his office that day, buzzing with hope. Finally, I thought, this could be it. Recognition, a chance to step into the light. What I didn't know was that Ethan had already scheduled a meeting with the investors that Friday. A private showcase of Crestmark's next big thing. And when he stepped into that glass-walled conference room, armed with my slides and my prototype, he didn't mention my name once. I wasn't invited to the meeting. I only heard about it from whispers in the office, the way people rushed out afterward, murmuring about brilliant innovation, about Cole's genius idea, about how Ethan just saved Crestmark's future. When I confronted him, he didn't flinch. He looked me in the eye, smirked, and said, "Daniel, ideas are company property. You're part of the company, so your idea belongs to all of us. Don't be naive." And then he laughed. Like my months of obsession, of sweat, of sacrifice were just a punchline. The humiliation stung deeper than I can describe. In the following weeks, the narrative hardened. Ethan was the visionary, the mastermind. I was just another mid-level manager pushing paperwork. People stopped looking at me the same way. My contributions blurred, my presence faded. He had stolen not just my idea, but my identity within the company. But here's the thing about masks. They can't hold forever. Because Ethan could talk, yes. He could dazzle a room. But he couldn't build. He couldn't adapt. He couldn't explain the deeper mechanics of what I'd made. And when investors started asking questions, real questions, his mask began to crack. That's when the tide shifted. But before I tell you how the truth clawed its way back into the open, before I show you what happens when arrogance collides with reality, let me leave you with this. Betrayal is a peculiar teacher. It doesn't just wound you, it sharpens you. It forces you to see not only who others are, but who you are. And in that furnace of humiliation and anger, something harder, stronger, and infinitely sharper is forged. This is not just a story about a stolen idea. This is a story about how truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of breaking through. And when it does, it doesn't just expose the liar, it destroys them. The weeks that followed were some of the longest of my life. Every morning, I would walk into Crestmark's polished lobby, past the glass panels that reflected the skyline, and feel the weight of silence pressing on me. My coworkers, people I joked with over coffee and pulled all-nighters with, now looked at me differently. Some avoided my eyes, others whispered when I passed by. The story had calcified. Ethan Cole was the genius. I was just background noise. It's hard to explain what that kind of invisibility does to you. You spend so much time carving an identity, only to feel it stripped away with a smirk and a boardroom lie. But invisibility has its own strange power. While Ethan basked in praise, I disappeared into the corners. And in those corners, I watched, I listened, and slowly I began to see cracks forming in his perfect facade. The first crack came in a board presentation 2 weeks later. Ethan was standing in front of the investors again, a sleek slide deck projected behind him, presenting his engagement engine. He was dazzling, as always, tossing around buzzwords, adaptive algorithms, behavioral journeys, scalable personalization. But then one of the investors, a silver-haired man named Lawrence Pierce, leaned forward and asked, "Ethan, could you walk us through the predictive weighting system? Specifically how the engine prioritizes user behaviors across different cohorts?" For a moment, Ethan's smile froze. His eyes flicked across the room, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. He launched into vague jargon, but his answer circled without ever landing. I was sitting in the back of the room, uninvited, but I slipped in under the guise of support staff. And I saw it. The faint narrowing of Lawrence's eyes, the skeptical frown tugging at another investor's lips. The seed of doubt had been planted. That night I sat in my apartment staring at the ceiling, anger and vindication battling inside me. I knew the system inside and out. I had lived with it, nurtured it, watched it grow line by line of code. Ethan could never fake that depth. Sooner or later, they'd see. But the waiting, the humiliation of sitting on my hands while he strutted through my creation, was unbearable. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything. Dates, times, conversations, drafts. Not because I thought I'd take legal action, but because I needed proof for myself that I wasn't crazy, that this was mine. Sometimes when the nights felt too heavy, I'd read through those pages and whisper, "They'll know. One day, they'll know." The second crack came when Ethan tried to push the system live. The prototype I built worked beautifully in controlled environments, but it wasn't production ready. There were flaws I hadn't fixed yet, issues with scale and data privacy. Ethan didn't care. He wanted glory now. So he ordered the engineers to deploy it company-wide. Within a week, chaos erupted. Users received conflicting notifications. Engagement spiked, then plummeted. Complaints flooded in about buggy prompts and irrelevant suggestions. On Twitter, someone posted a screenshot of the system spamming them 20 times in an hour. The post went viral. Inside Crestmark, panic set in. Engineers scrambled to patch issues. Support staff worked overtime fielding angry customers. And Ethan, oh, Ethan, he kept assuring investors this was a minor hiccup, just teething pains of a revolutionary product. But behind closed doors, he was furious. And like every coward, he needed someone to blame. One Friday afternoon, he summoned me to his office. I'll never forget the scene. He was standing by the window, the city skyline glowing behind him, tie loosened, jaw tight. "Daniel," he said, voice dripping with false calm. "We've got a situation. The engine's underperforming. The investors are nervous. And frankly, I think this traces back to the way you originally structured the prototype." My stomach dropped. "Excuse me." He turned, eyes cold. "Let's not play games. You rushed the foundation. You sold me an incomplete vision. Now the whole company's suffering." It was surreal. Not only had he stolen my idea, but now he was trying to bury me under its flaws. I clenched my fists, forcing my voice to stay level. "Ethan, you know that system wasn't production ready. I told you." He cut me off, stepping closer, lowering his voice like a predator circling prey. "Careful, Daniel. This is bigger than you. Investors trust me, not you. If this ship sinks, do you really want to be the one tied to the anchor?" I left his office shaking. Rage boiled in my chest, hot and choking. But beneath it, another feeling stirred. Clarity. Ethan had just made a mistake. By trying to push blame onto me, he had tied me back into the narrative. If the investors started asking questions, and they would, I had an opening. The third crack came at the quarterly investor review. I wasn't supposed to be there. My name wasn't on the agenda. But I slipped in again, sitting quietly in the back as Ethan began his polished performance. He strutted across the stage, clicking through slides, talking about vision and growth. But the investors weren't smiling this time. They'd seen the headlines. They'd heard the complaints. And then Lawrence Pierce raised his hand again. "Ethan," he said slowly, "can you explain why the system triggered duplicate event loops in the engagement pathways? Specifically in the high-frequency user segment?" The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan mumbled something about unexpected scaling anomalies. Lawrence didn't blink. He turned his gaze, sharp, hawk-like, toward the back of the room, toward me. "Daniel," he said, "you've been quiet. You were involved in this, weren't you? What's your perspective?" The room shifted, heads turned, eyes landed on me, the ghost in the corner. My throat tightened, but inside something uncoiled. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. I stood, heart pounding, and said, "With respect, the system wasn't ready for deployment. The prototype worked in controlled tests, but scaling requires staged rollout and additional safeguards. That didn't happen. And the flaws you're seeing now, they come directly from skipping those steps." A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan's face darkened, a flush creeping up his neck. "Interesting," Lawrence said, leaning back. "Thank you, Daniel." For the first time in months, I felt seen. Not fully, not yet, but seen. That night I walked home through the fog-draped streets of San Francisco, every step echoing with a single truth. The mask was slipping. Ethan could steal credit, twist narratives, even humiliate me in front of colleagues. But he couldn't outrun reality. Reality was patient, and reality was on my side. By the time spring rolled around, Crestmark was limping. What was supposed to be our crowning achievement, our breakthrough innovation, had become a black eye on the company. User churn was higher than ever. Tech blogs mocked our AI that wouldn't shut up. And while Ethan kept strutting through meetings with his smile plastered on like a mask of porcelain, the cracks had widened. Investors wanted answers. The quarterly review had left a lingering unease in the air. People in the office started whispering again, but differently this time. It wasn't pity for me anymore. It was doubt about him. Engineers exchanged glances when Ethan spoke. Analysts rolled their eyes behind his back. Slowly, the myth of his brilliance was eroding, replaced by something brittle. And then came the day that changed everything. It was a Wednesday morning, gray and drizzling outside, the kind of San Francisco day where the clouds hang low and heavy. The investors were scheduled for a deep dive session, an all-hands showcase to evaluate Crestmark's future. It was do or die time. Either we proved we had control of the system, or the funding would dry up. Ethan was nervous. I could see it in the way he tugged at his cufflinks, the way his voice pitched a little higher than usual in the prep meeting. But he still carried himself with that same arrogance, still convinced he could bluff his way through. When the session began, the room felt electric. Investors lined one side of the long glass table, laptops open, faces stern. On the other side, Crestmark's leadership team sat stiffly. Ethan took the floor, clicker in hand, slides glowing behind him. He launched into his speech, a familiar cascade of buzzwords. Disruptive innovation, predictive personalization, market-leading engagement. But this time, the investors weren't nodding. They weren't smiling. They were waiting. Halfway through, Lawrence Pierce cut him off. His voice was calm, but it sliced through the room like a blade. "Ethan," he said, "your presentation is polished, as always. But we've reviewed the data, and something doesn't add up. You've claimed user retention improved by 30%. Our independent analysis shows the opposite. So I'll ask plainly, who actually built this system, and who understands how it works? The silence was suffocating. Ethan froze. For the first time, truly froze. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Words failed him. And then Lawrence turned, deliberately, toward me. Daniel, would you care to explain? I felt the weight of every eye in the room. My chest tightened. My mind raced. This was it, the moment when months of humiliation and betrayal converged into a single chance. I could shrink, let fear consume me, or I could speak the truth. I stood slowly, the chair scraping against the polished floor. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. Crestmark's engagement engine was my concept. I developed the prototype, ran the initial tests, and built the framework. I also flagged that it wasn't production ready, but it was deployed prematurely against my recommendation, which is why you've seen these issues. The system can work, it will work, but only if it's handled with the care and depth it requires. The room erupted with murmurs. Ethan tried to cut in, stammering about team collaboration, but Lawrence held up a hand. His gaze stayed fixed on me. You understand the mechanics? He asked. Yes, I said. Every line, every flaw, every strength. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. And then Lawrence smiled, not a wide grin, but a small, satisfied curl of the lips. Good. Then we've been talking to the wrong person. Ethan's face drained of color. He sputtered, tried to salvage control, but the tide had turned. Questions rained down, technical questions, strategic questions, and every one of them came to me. And with each answer, I felt my voice grow stronger, steadier, until the humiliation that had weighed me down for months burned away, replaced by something sharp and clean. Vindication. By the end of the session, it was clear. The investors no longer saw Ethan as the visionary. They saw him for what he was, an empty suit wrapped around other people's brilliance. And they saw me for what I had always been, the creator. The fallout was swift. Within weeks, Ethan was transitioned out. That's how the email put it, a polite euphemism for a man who had built his throne on lies and finally watched it crumble. He disappeared from Crestmark's halls, his office stripped bare overnight. As for me, the investors insisted I lead the next phase of development. For the first time, my name was on the slides, my voice at the podium, my work recognized. And it wasn't just about pride, it was about proof. Proof that no matter how much someone tries to bury the truth, reality has a way of clawing back to the surface. I won't lie and say it was all sweet. There was bitterness in me still, scars from the months of invisibility, the laughter, the way Ethan's smirk haunted my nights. But when I stood in front of that room, explaining the system I had birthed from nothing, and saw respect shining back at me, that was enough. Because revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about revelation. About standing in the light while the mask of your betrayer cracks and falls away. And as I watched Ethan's empire of arrogance collapse, I realized something. He had humiliated me, yes. But in the end, he had handed me the perfect stage for justice. All I had to do was step onto it. In the weeks after Ethan's departure, the office atmosphere shifted like the first breath after a storm. People who had once whispered in corners now approached my desk openly, offering congratulations, gratitude, even apologies. I wasn't bitter with them. They had done what so many of us do in environments built on power and perception. They believed the mask. They bowed to the charisma. And in that, they weren't complicit. They were human. The investors, true to their word, gave me the reins. It wasn't easy. Leading meant responsibility, and responsibility meant no more hiding in corners, no more letting others take the spotlight while I tinkered in the shadows. But when I walked into that boardroom now, it wasn't to watch someone else hold my work hostage. It was to own it, to present it, to answer the hard questions and stand behind the answers. And in that, I found something unexpected. I thought vindication would feel like fire, hot, consuming, a roar of triumph over the man who tried to erase me. But instead, it felt quieter, calmer, like a long, slow exhale after holding my breath for too long. Justice isn't always thunderous. Sometimes it's just the steady weight of truth settling into its rightful place. Ethan vanished from the industry, at least in the circles that mattered. I heard whispers, failed startups, botched pitches, doors that no longer opened for him. That was his punishment. Not some dramatic collapse on stage, but a slow fade into irrelevance. He had built his career on mirrors and smoke, and when the mirrors cracked and the smoke cleared, there was nothing left. As for me, I learned something invaluable. Ideas are fragile things. They can be stolen, twisted, mocked. But the depth behind an idea, the sweat, the obsession, the nights you spend breathing life into it, that cannot be stolen. Because when the questions come, when reality demands answers, only the one who lived with the idea can deliver them. And the world, eventually, learns to tell the difference. To anyone listening who's been there, who's had credit stolen, who's been silenced by louder voices, who's been humiliated by someone with more power, I'll tell you this: the pain is real, the anger is justified. But don't mistake silence for defeat. Don't let invisibility convince you that you don't matter. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is patience, because truth is like gravity. It may be delayed, but it always pulls liars down. Looking back, I don't thank Ethan. He was a thief, a coward, and a bully. But I do acknowledge him, because without his betrayal, I might never have stepped fully into the light. I might have stayed in the background, tinkering forever, content to let someone else hold the stage. His arrogance forced me to fight, and in fighting, I found my voice. So now, when I walk into Crestmark's offices, when I see the system running smoothly, when I watch engagement numbers climb, not because of buzzwords, but because of the work itself, I don't just see software. I see a lesson carved in stone. That betrayal may sting, humiliation may scar, but justice, in its quiet, patient way, will always arrive. And when it does, it doesn't just set the record straight. It gives you something no thief can steal, the undeniable proof that what you built was yours all along.